Welcome to SAPBLA here at the St. Anthony Park Library. This is a series of forums that we have once a month if we're not doing Pi Day or singing with Dan Sherrard. So welcome, and this wonderful panel here is moderated by David Grant, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to him.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yes.
Nice to be sitting here tonight in a community library that obviously is thought of as a real treasure around here. It's pretty special. One of our panelists, Chris, was asking if this is one of the Carnegie libraries. They're all built around the same time, and yes, indeed it is. Somebody ought to write a book about those libraries as a group, and with photographs, right, for our tables. I remember somebody in northern Minnesota once telling me that when Icelandic immigrants moved to northern Minnesota, first thing they did was get together and build a library before anything else, because it would then be the community center for everything. The city hall, a place for people to get together and do social activities, but also get together and read. So we'll be talking a little bit about libraries as community institutions and beloved community institutions a little bit tonight. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to jump right into things so that we can expand this conversation out into the room and include all of you, okay? My name is David Grant. I'll be moderating this panel. I'm a locally based writer, mostly screenwriter and playwright, and I teach screenwriting over at Film North here in St. Paul, and also for Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. Directly to my left here is Ryan Fierick, who is a veteran teacher for the St. Francis schools, teaches business and computers, but he's also heavily involved with Education Minnesota, and I'll ask both him and Chris, who's here representing Education Minnesota, to tell you a little bit about the organization as we move a little further down the table. Chris is currently the education coordinator's speechwriter and community educator. He's heavily involved with the Race, Class, Gender Narrative Project in Minnesota. Many of you have seen the output of the committees that created that work, and coordinating the union's response to a national campaign against equity policies for LGBTQ youth, and is overseeing the union's public opinion polling and message developing policies. Sitting next to him is Alicia Grants from the ACLU in Minnesota. She used to be with the Ramsey County Public Defender's Office, but has been now with the ACLU for several years. And sitting next to her is Judy Woodward. Many of you in this room know her already. She's a librarian who had a long career in the public libraries, and for 25 years she was chair of the Protested Materials Committee for the Ramsey County Library. So she can tell you a whole lot about that process and what it's like to defend the right to read. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, our First Amendment is all about freedom of thought as much as it is about freedom of speech. And so the struggle over banning books runs deep and wide in our culture, in our society, because of our commitment to that First Amendment to the Constitution. So I will ask you, Chris, and actually you too, Ryan, to just share a word or two with the folk who are gathered here tonight about Education Minnesota, the genesis of the organization and what it does.
Super proud to be here to be able to share the story of the work that we do through Education Minnesota. It is a statewide organization that represents the educators in many of our communities, as well as helps advocate on behalf of our students. So we come forward with the goal and the importance of trying to make sure we can take care and provide the best opportunity for our kids in order to create hopefully a better tomorrow. And The work, especially out of St. Francis where I came from, laid some of that groundwork in a little different display that I never thought we'd have to battle over this time. In this case, that brings me here today with the book bans and some advocating strongly with school boards and trying to make sure that they make the right decisions.
Chris, you want to add to that?
I would just say that we are, of course, we're a labor union, and we're a member of the AFT and the National Education Association, both. So we have access to information and resources for fighting these sort of book bans, particularly in schools from all over the country.
Thank you. Judy, when people rose up from the community and had a suggestion, or perhaps it was that mild, just a suggestion, or a question, or a concern about a book, how did you approach those, and how do you suggest that librarians approach those in general?
Well, I think one of the things that really helped us in 25 years, several decades of doing this, one of the things that really helped me is that we had definite procedures in place. We had forms that we had people fill out. We had a process for reconsideration of materials. We had written reports at every stage, and we had an appeals process. Not all of those steps were necessary each time, and there was one other part of the process that was unwritten, but I sometimes found that the most important part, and that was when people, well, first of all, I want to preface my remarks by saying I've been retired for 2 years, and I understand that the game is a lot tougher these days. But when I was working at the Ramsey County Library, protests for the most part were individuals who had strong convictions, which I didn't usually agree with, but very strong personal convictions about certain materials. So the process with me always began with listening. I always, before I launched into my full-throated defense of the First Amendment, which I always got to eventually. For those of you who know me, you know I talk a lot, But in those cases, I managed to restrain myself long enough to listen, to really listen intuitively and empathetically to the concerns that people had. And if there's time, I would like to share this one anecdote with you, because when I started this job, I thought I was going to be in there slugging away, fighting for the First Amendment, every day, and I thought, fine, bring it on, I'm a fighter, So the first protest I ever had was a woman, and I called her up to find out, just what the nature of her protest was. And it turns out the nature of her protest was what she really wanted to talk about. She thought what she wanted to talk about was books in the children's collection that she thought were inappropriate for her 7- and 9-year-old sons. But what she really wanted to talk about, as it turned out, was she was a single mother, and she wanted to tell me how difficult it was to raise children in a super sexual and violence-saturated society like ours. Well, that was something that I could relate to. At that point, I was also the mother of 2 pre-teenagers. And by the time we finished our conversation, and I explained to her my feelings that although I agreed with her, it is tough to raise children in our society today. The way to raise them is not to ban materials that other people's children and adults want to read, but to make good judgment decisions for you, yourself, personally, and for your own children. That was something that we could agree on. And by the end of the conversation, she said, well, I've really enjoyed talking to you. I think we can end my protest right here. And I thought, wow, maybe I have a talent for this. And so I guess the moral of that story, and there is a moral behind it, is when you have protests, when you have attempts for book banning, I think it's always important to remember this is not necessarily a monolithic force of evil that you're combating. These are people with maybe, likely quite different feelings, quite different values than your own, but nevertheless, they are people who come at the situation from what seems to them a very rational and eminently sympathizable point of view. So, yeah, I guess, I try to listen, and I hope after I listen to the protester, then they will listen to me. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you. Chris, you were recently, and you too very much, Brian, in the middle of a very different kind of fight, one that came across kind of the polar opposite of the one that Judy just described to us. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with the attempt to ban books in the St. Francis community, and how you guys and your allies responded to it?
I want to start by saying that I'm a public school teacher, so what I'm going to give you is my perspective of what it was, boots on the ground, engaging with the community and finding allies in order to make a difference. In St. Francis, you might be a little bit of a shock for you to realize that up in northern Anoka County, we're a little different politically than we are in these areas. And we battled over book bans in some way, shape, or form for 18 months. But it never rose to the level of having to worry about it on a grand scale like it was going to happen. And then what ultimately ended up becoming the biggest issue is a group became organized. We won't call them a monolith or anything. I still believe I want to believe a best of intent, but once you put them all in the same room and they started creating plans between school board meetings, and then a very deliberate agenda was pushed. And so for our school district, what we watched is after the election, which I thought was really interesting last year around this time, they went into hyper-focus mode, came to every single board meeting, started making people nervous about reading books publicly and just making folks uncomfortable with what we would reference as potty language, but it's what's in the book to describe what it is. And what we found is it started moving some of the school board members. And from an educator leader standpoint, I was still comfortable they weren't going to make any headway. But at the last meeting, at the last moment of folks who were about to leave the board, they rammed it through. And we went from having really nice local control to handing over decision-making to a website. And so for us, that website was the first decision maker on any book that was challenged. So you even hear it in the story, like good conversations around the why with books, those were gone. If someone challenged a book and it was based off this website and it met a certain rating, there was no discussion, it was removed. So we presented an alternative vision on what that looked like. We had just given up local control in an area that likes to promote local control. And what was great is a couple parents came out and they made a huge difference. They were pissed, okay? And I knew we were winning and we were on the right path with the way we were talking about it. When people we disagreed with on nearly everything, even on social media, were like, we don't like the teachers union, but they're right in this case, and we're gonna march with them on it. And so book bans for us became a very hot button topic, but it allowed us to build some new relationships. And as things moved forward, ultimately we had parents, students, my own children were heckling me at home, and we had to bring forward a lawsuit. And in our community, that wasn't great. That was a risky scenario to do, but the school board told us, if you're gonna sue us, just sue us already, because we're not gonna change it. And so then we talked to Chris, and we started working with some other folks in the community, the ACLU, and what we found was an alliance and a growing community group that said, we want to make a difference, we want to change it, and now that we're paying attention, you better watch out, because we're going to make sure we change it and make it better for our kids. It was super frustratingly rewardable. With not very often do we put those words together, but the idea that a new group of community members that felt isolated in their area and thought they were the only people that believed this way, now had built friendships, coming to board meetings, and were willing to carry their own lawsuit forward and in order to make a difference, because it was that big of a deal. And I just want to say thanks, and whoever this gets out, to anybody who ever takes on a challenge like that. In our area, that came with a huge risk. Especially early on, even getting a few of my own other educators on board to sign on to the lawsuit, they felt like they're, with where we're at politically right now, like they might be targeted, they might come out of their house or something might happen to their kids. But they took that challenge on anyway, and what they found out is the community actually supported them. And they found their allies, and our people just want to listen and make it better. We ultimately never, I think technically went to court, but settled before it got there, and we got nearly everything we would have wanted. All the books are put back. They need to be they can be reviewed, but the idea that an individual group can come together and spend a weekend filling out forms, targeting books based off the score rating, fill a form and then submit 45, I think we were up to 65 by the time we were done, and they were just gone. Those days are gone. Every single one of them has to be thoughtfully reviewed. We can't promise everything's going to be kept, but there will be a process that's followed. And those school board members are off because they were in that lame duck and replaced with a couple nicer ones. I'll put it that way. But we still continue to have that battle out there. And we don't know what the next topic is, but it went from where we were to our neighbors, to the north, to like it created a playbook for how they want to do this type of work. And I can't thank both of these two fine individuals for the heavy lift that they did on all those things I have no idea about, because they're just much more fancier. But when we went there to try to ask for help, they were there and they didn't say, this is, you probably don't want, they said, we're gonna take this challenge up, and if you're gonna be the first in the country, it's not going to be on our watch. So, yeah.
Speaking of the playbook for navigating your way through a crisis like this, I'm gonna ask both of you, Alicia and also Chris, what some of the lessons you feel were learned from this battle in St. Francis that other communities can learn from and can model, to others.
I can start. I think, Ryan, thank you, and thank your whole community. I often say that a lawyer like me is necessary, but I'm not sufficient. I'm not enough. The real heavy lifting comes from community members and people who are willing to be brave. And what we really learned in this case was the people who really made this happen were our clients, were the people going to school board meetings, people going to libraries for events. We definitely learned some new things about Minnesota's book ban statute, and had to be creative about how we were going to tell the court to use it. And we're going to have to be much more flexible and very creative when we think about using Minnesota law versus the United States Constitution and the First Amendment. I want everybody in here we love the First Amendment, we do, but we also have to love the Minnesota Constitution, because right now, the federal Constitution is changing. It is, every day rights are collapsing as interpreted by the Supreme Court. And so all of us together have to pivot, have to be thinking, okay, how am I gonna stand up as a community member and protect the people around me and protect myself? And the ACLU is, we're a small group. There's 20 of us total, not lawyers, like 20 people. But with help from people like you and other community members who have problems, we can do mighty, mighty things. And I think the two lawsuits that we filed showed school boards in Minnesota that we are not backing down, that we are in this to win this, and they can try, but they can't take our books away. I grew up in libraries. I love reading, and if you go after a librarian, I will fight you. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my what I would say. I learned, you know, we'll file more of these. We have it all ready to go. If we see another school board make a decision like they did in St. Francis. Yeah, Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, I can just add a couple of things. As you mentioned in my introduction, so one of the things I do is I work on a lot of lobbying and the polling. The polling we do at Education Minnesota. And that gets relevant because one of the lessons for St. Francis was, if you tell Minnesotans this is happening, and you get over the idea that I think a lot of us carried around, at least I did before St. Francis, was this can't happen here. This is Minnesota, then Iowa maybe you got fine, but not Minnesota. And it very much can. I mean, that was one of the big lessons. But we've always gone into these fights knowing that the communities would probably rally with us if they knew what it was. And I'll just tell a little vignette going back a little. In 2022, when Moms for Liberty was just getting fired up and we were just talking about critical race theory, or at least their weird definition of it, and all that stuff was happening. Education Minnesota participated in a national poll that the NEA had done about voters all over America. And you can do these things called buying into a poll, which means you can spend some money and you can get a couple questions asked about your state votes. And this was about all that agenda. And they give a presentation, and the pollster, who I had known, said, "Hey Chris, can you stay on the call for just a little while longer?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "So here's what I gotta tell you. We crunched all the numbers, and I can tell you this, Minnesotans hate book bans more than any other group of people in America." He says, can I have an explanation for it? Y'all like plaid, your food is bland, and you hate book bans. And so he sent me these numbers, and I've got all sorts of data and sheets on it and everything else. But I've been carrying that story with me when I do presentations about how to push back on these. And it's a great memory that you simply have to tell people it's happening, and you have agency in stopping it, right? And so when we did this sort of public outreach, one of the things Ryan didn't mention was that this website was created by Moms for Liberty, right? It's called Book Clicks. It's gone under now. But the books they were banning were shocking to people, including reporters. They banned Elie Wiesel's Night. They banned Native Son. They banned Slaughterhouse-Five, which is one of my favorite books in high school, Vonnegut. They banned The Handmaid's Tale, because irony is alive and well. And they banned The Kite Runner, which I don't know if everyone's read The Kite Runner. It's become kind of a high school classic, maybe since some of us have graduated from high school. And when we were working on an op-ed that we wrote about this, one of the librarians, I believe it was, had mentioned that they had pulled these books and that these were really popular and that they had taken them, they were all like in a big shelf downstairs in the basement of the library with like a police warning tape around them and a little sign that says, "Don't give to kids," right? And so we heard about this, and I don't know if it was your idea or it was my idea, but we sort of sent her down there and said, "We won't tell where we got this photo, but we need a photo." And so they got a photo, and we worked with some friends who we were working with from Penn America, and we managed to pass that photo to the author of The Kite Runner, a guy named Khalid Hassani, who got the memo, and then he called me maybe an hour after he got it. He said, "What can I do to help? This is really shocking. I hate it when this happens." And so he gave us like 3 hours of his time, right? Internationally famous author. And said, "I'll do whatever you want." He said, "Give me a Thursday." It was the Thursday before the school board meeting on a Tuesday, if I remember, right? So, and we just booked him up. He was on NPR, you may have heard it. He did another NPR show. He did the Star Tribune. He did the Reformer. He did maybe one other TV station, maybe two. And so he did all this media. He lent his name and his celebrity to this cause in little St. Francis, Minnesota. And by the time Tuesday rolled around, we had gotten something like $250,000 worth of free advertising, essentially, from him and a lot of other authors. Jodi Picoult participated and some others. So when we had this big sort of showdown school board meeting, we did a press conference with it. And we had 300 people from the community? About 300 people?
That's a lot for us, 300 for the community.
Right, 300 people from a town that's not very big and is traditionally thought of as deep red. you had a huge slice of community show up on the front lawn of the school board, yelling and holding signs that yelled freedom to read. And if I remember, there was about 100 comments and about 1 in favor of the ban. And frankly, she didn't have a good night. So, again, the longer story is, there is something about Minnesotans that don't like book bans. There's also something about Minnesotans that don't really believe it can happen here until it starts to happen here. But if you can rouse folks and let them know it's happening and give them an outlet for that, I think we can push these things back consistently just about anywhere.
Can I add something about that issue of Minnesotans not liking book bans?
Yeah, please do.
In 25 years, I must have dealt with hundreds of people who didn't like particular books, and every single one of them, almost without fail, started out, I don't believe in banning books, but so I got so used to that, so I think, yeah, I'll just stop there.
Well, the culture of civic engagement that exists here in Minnesota, it's not a myth, it's a very real thing. And so obviously that's something that works very much in our favor. But I'd like all of you to talk a little bit about the role of everyday people in terms of standing tall, standing tough, and remaining vigilant against this rising tide, and hopefully it won't last very long, of book bans that we're up against from sea to shining sea in this country. So you talk a little bit about the role that everyday people have in terms of taking agency and standing up against this tide of book bans.
I'd love to. I think, yeah, okay.
Yeah, now you're good.
I do want to plug the ACLU as part of our Freedom to Read and Freedom to Learn campaign. We've started something called the School Board Watch. And it's actually launching tonight. I'm not at that event, I'm at this event. But you can learn more about our website, on our website. Essentially, it's a setup where people can volunteer to monitor their school board meetings and send us, we have a form with different issues. It's not just book banning, it's also things like bathroom, gender in bathrooms. There's one school right now that wants to allow essentially hate symbols, like their superintendent drives a car with a Confederate flag on it. So, things like that, people like you, people like your neighbors, people like your relatives, they can go and school board meetings, these guys know, they're public. And you can go and you can cause them some pain, and you can tell them what you want. Because, Moms for Liberty, Minnesota Parents Alliance, they are out there, they are getting people elected. And we as a community, we as people who love to read and who love the First Amendment and who love the freedom to learn and think, you can go out there and push back. And that's one way you can start helping us, is letting us know where problems are. So tell all your friends, go to the ACLU website and join School Board Watch.
Great ideas, thank you.
Yep, can I please. And so that's Forest Lake. I'll name it. And it's not the superintendent, actually, it's the school board chair who drives around with the General Lee's Confederate flag. And that gets relevant because I was going to say the single best thing we can do as just regular Minnesotans to stop book bans and stop what I think is going to be a bigger issue, whitewashing history, and the sort of quote-unquote patriotic curriculum that the White House is pushing, is simply vote. I mean, we're still a democracy. Well, I haven't checked my phone recently, but I'm pretty sure we're still a democracy. And if you want to stop book bans in schools, you elect school board members who also don't want book bans in schools, right? And you're going to have to be a critical thinker when it comes to this, because a lot of times what we're seeing, Brian mentioned in St. Francis, we saw it before, it's like they will be elected with the endorsement of Moms for Liberty, of the Child Protection League, of Minnesota Parents Alliance, and their postcards won't say, I'm gonna ban books, or I'm gonna go after this. It'll be something very nebulous about school safety or traditional values. And then once they get in office, that's when we start to see this kind of toxic, divisive stuff. So my play is, be a voter and be a discriminating one while you do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Here's what you can do in terms of libraries, public libraries. Librarians want to know what you want to read. And what I mean by that, with reference to the whitewashing of history that we're talking about now, the more people ask for a book, the more likely librarians are to buy the book. If you feel that there is a gap in your library's collection, for example, if the books in the American history section lean too much to a whitewashed version of American history, that may happen somewhere, it may not. But if you feel that way, the librarian is your friend in this regard. We librarians want to know what people want. So if you feel that there is not sufficient diversity, representation of other points of view, representation of marginalized people, if you feel that there is a need for that, if you have titles to suggest, make those suggestions, come and talk to us. We want to hear from you, because the more we can say there is a demand for this, the more likely we are in these budget-stricken times to be able to buy the materials. Okay?
Yeah, excellent comments all. You know, one of the kind of underlying themes here is that when people who want to ban books attack the libraries and assault our schools, they begin to find out that there are indeed all kinds of systems in place for decision making that are rational and that are loving and that have been well thought out, right? And much of their assault is based on the erroneous idea that there's nobody minding the store and that someone, somewhere, is forcing some sort of an agenda down the throats of everyday people. The more they butt up against how things really work, the more they discover that, now you can't convince people who believe in conspiracy theories. You can talk yourself blue in the face, and if they're really entrenched, they're not going to budge off the dime. But everyday people who have been influenced by those who heavily believe in conspiracy theories can be nudged away from that place, from that precipice, and not go over the edge. So that's another reason to stand firm and stand tall and speak up for and defend these institutions that have been lovingly built over a long period of time. And even public education itself, as a concept, is under attack right now. So that's another area in which all of us who could be natural allies of each other need to come together and remember why we have a public education system in this country. That it's about building citizens who are able to go out and cast a rational vote, as Chris is saying. Without a public education system that sees to the basics that every good citizen, as they're reaching the age that they can vote, needs to know in order to go out there and cast a vote. We're fighting for the whole thing, right, as we move ahead. Before we close this evening, I know that we really have to watch our time closely. I want to make sure that we're leaving plenty of time for you folks who've come to join us tonight to speak to and become part of this conversation. So I want to expand it out into the room. So can we do that? Can we hand one of the mics around the room for people to pass around? If you got questions or comments for this stellar panel that has come to you tonight.
So I think this is probably for Chris. I think you mentioned You mentioned that there's some Minnesota book ban statute. And can you give us sort of a thumbnail history of that law and how we might use it or reference it? And then also what protections we have in the Minnesota Constitution beyond the First Amendment?
Sure, pardon me, test. First of all, prefacing this by I am not an attorney, and if I go too far afield, you can elbow me. We do have a ban, or we do have a law that has been called the ban on book bans. It was passed, the lead author was Cedric Frazier, who's an attorney who actually works at Education Minnesota. It's his day job, so he's very familiar with this. What the ban on book ban does not say is that you cannot remove a book, full stop. What it says is that you must have, as we had referenced here, a reasonable way that includes community engagement, local decision making, and the voice of educators and expertise of school librarians. At least I'm frankly more familiar with the school version than the part of it that applies to other folks. So that's the way it works. There's also parts of the Minnesota Constitution which limit the ability to remove materials because of their content, particularly their political or religious viewpoints. Did I get that about right?
Yeah.
Other questions?
So I read the settlement, and there's a 3-year process with this settlement. And what the question in my mind was, what the heck? There's the no ban on banning books, and yet there's a process that goes 3 years, and then what? So what happens at the end of 3 years? There's a plan there in that, isn't there?
Well, so there's this court settlement is essentially enforceable for 3 years. That doesn't mean that after 3 years they can just do whatever they want and nothing, and we won't sue them again, right? So for 3 years they're supposed to be following this process, and if they don't, then we can come back in and get the law involved. We thought about that because of the length of term limits, and so I don't want everyone to think, oh, then 3 years is nothing. 3 years is a good amount of time. Hopefully, it'll also get us to a better place generally. I don't know. But certainly if St. Francis steps out of line, I'm very interested in going back in. So it's not that we won't keep watching.
I think the part that's really important about the 3 years that you want to make sure you consider is the idea that it puts more of a mandate back onto the school board to not do something ludicrous. And the idea that at one point they would have been just happy, and that's the part I want you to think about too. Like, we'll just go back to the original book policy. Well, those days have passed. That's not good enough anymore because the last one didn't work and you wouldn't follow it anyway. And when you have a school board makeup, and it could be at any point, it could be the current one, it could be whatever one's new in a year from now, that says things like, just sue us then. Some of those guardrails have to be there to hopefully reestablish things, put a reset on it, allow the actual process to work. That's the other part, that our school districts actually never ran the process to full completion. It required you to go to a book review committee. The first book that was reviewed, which was very specifically chosen prior to the change, was a dicey one, and I can't remember which one it was. But the book review committee suggested to keep it. Instead of it going to the school board to make a decision where you would have local control, the school board handed it over at that point to the website because they didn't want to be on record of being the group that banned a book. So they handed off the decision making, and that's what triggered a lot of this. Instead of letting the process work itself through, And if those school board members decide to ban the book, they should be on the record so that then we can come back in the election and hold them accountable for the decision that they made. That's the way the process is supposed to work. Even if I don't agree anyway with the way that they made the decision, at least they're on record now, and now our community has a choice to make. Do you support this type of behavior, or do you not? And at that, I wouldn't have wanted to be them on record, and that's their way of sidestepping it and allowing someone else to have the decision, so they could put their hands up for those first month to, I think it was about 2.5 months before they really started taking us seriously, and just say, sorry, can't do anything about it, we can't, that one's gone. And it's like, no, you are supposed to be the decision makers. We elected you to represent us. Even if I don't agree with what you have to say, I still need to be able to talk to my representative on behalf of not just my members or my fellow educators in St. Francis, but on behalf of my 3 children. And I think the one part, if you haven't looked into the St. Francis book ban, that's important, that if you looked at the whole process, that will inspire you for the future. It's not the adults, it's the kids. Those kids came out, and I'm telling you, every style of student, if you ever dig up the actual school board meeting that was at and you watch it, it is amazing to watch them make the sales pitch of telling the school board and the special side committee that did this to get out of our schools. These kids did not want it, and I will tell you, they were not coached. These were kids that got together and did it. Like, initially, people came out and said, oh, it's just the team. No, our groups, I specifically had our groups step aside so that we wouldn't be playing, because you knew if they got their hands into it, this was gonna make a difference. And they shared the messages that they were passionate about. And so 3 years buys another generation to come through, our kids to get 3 years further, allow another set of students and people to enter the community that went through this, and frankly, build a little bit of an infrastructure so that if you do something stupid like that again, a new group of people and the same group of people are gonna come out, and it's only going to grow.
Do you know,
The kids
are
already-
those videos still available on YouTube or anywhere else that people can go ahead and watch them?
I think yes, because it's a public school board meeting, and so that section, I'd been going to school board meetings for 18 years. Somewhere along the way, I got twisted, and I'd be the only one sitting in a room. But it was because I needed to answer people's questions and why they made a terrible decision. But the old terrible decisions we made, life's hindsight, they were little problems. Now we're making big, terrible decisions. And so earlier, I think you asked a question like, what could people do? You're gonna have to show up in places you never thought you would, and then you're going to have to share with people that don't have the time to get there. I will tell you, as a father with 3 awesome, as best as I can, kids, I am stretched about as thin as possible. We prioritize going to the school board, but there are people who can make it to those that when you show up, you get to make the decisions, and for a while there, we were outnumbered. And it was comfortable to make that bad choice. But it was because no one else was coming, and it was just 2 of us, me and another individual, like, I can't believe they're doing this. But we need folks to show up, to engage in the process, and then share your perspective with people who can't be there. Because we have folks working more jobs than they ever have before, more hours in a week to do the things that we used to think were small things now feel like huge things, as silly as it is. And so you can definitely, if you haven't Googled it and coming into it as you go home, if you go to try to check out like what happened, there will be a pretty good set of information for St. Francis book ban. You can just, if you do dig back through in the YouTube, just find meetings where people actually showed up in the pictures at the start, and you'll be like, that's probably one of them, because it's the ones that that no one was there, those are the boring ones, but it's the ones when we showed up, and those will also give you some of the times that you could reference to go back. So like when there's a press release or something, it normally references some of the dates.
I want to add, I don't know about Anoka County, but in Ramsey County, go to your public library, because those are the kind of things that we have access to, school board meeting videos. So ask a librarian.
Yeah, as always, good advice. Right?
There was a lot of news coverage of that particular school board meeting too. So you'll find that CCO was there, CARE 11 there, KSTP was there, and you'll probably see some of the sound bites of some of the really remarkable kids who spoke out. What you won't see is them turning the camera around and seeing the look of fear from the school board member as the debate team showed up to explain to them why they were wrong. So you had to, sometimes you gotta be there.
Love that, love that. You've got a question.
I was wondering, is as a school teacher.
Hold it out.
As a school teacher in the district, did you get pushback from the administration?
It makes for contentious times, because I think you have to also understand that it's not political, but the way that it works, the superintendent has to represent the board. Some of the administration will toe the line. The version of pushback that I was expecting initially we got, but that was just because we were into some untested water. I mean, nobody wants to file a lawsuit, and nobody wants to get a lawsuit. So initially, things got pretty heated, but one of the things I've always prided myself with is like, okay, let's get past the hurt feelings, and now let's have the real conversation. And if parents hadn't shown up, and students hadn't shown up, and the other educators to support the educators that carried the lawsuit hadn't shown up, there would have been more pushback. But folks read a room, and once you fill it a couple times and you want to just, everybody wants to get it over, but get it over with when we all kind of know we're on the same path. Administration, for the most part, was directed to not engage. It's probably a wise choice in that scenario, not that I can judge their choices, but.
You have one over here?
I have a question, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it, but I always think that education is a local institution. I mean, we have it broken down in tiny communities. And how can we have some outsider decide what books the kids can read? I mean, did I understand that right? That the school board essentially said, okay, we're going to let this outside, which comes from, we don't know. It's lost its local piece, hasn't it?
I think that's why we won a lot of the public comment, the public conversation on it is, for us, it turned into a conversation on hypocrisy. The same school board members that supported this movement said that everything that comes out of St. Paul is a terrible choice for our schools around here. Well, that stuff makes it a lot easier to win those arguments. To say that, okay, it's so not local that Florida's now deciding what books Minnesotans get to read. Okay, this is silly. And I think it all really came together by the time we were done. The same day we released that we had an agreement, Book Looks closed, the website that they used. So there was a lot of pressure being put on the system in weird spots. Now that isn't the same national administration as in place now, like all those other, but it was weird to watch how far it could really stretch, but the conversations didn't have to be complicated. It was, let's do good by the kids that are here. If you have a problem, our folks that had never engaged on social media on divisive topics started answering on social media, which is a terrible place right now. Have you talked to the school principal yet? And the people who had a problem, no. They had not engaged in the process. And everybody was able to start to see through it. And that's where you just come together as a community, like, we're willing to have the discussion. You should have the discussion. When we talk to parents that originally were supportive of the idea, why would you outsource the decision-making of your child's education to a group? You don't like St. Paul. It's many more states to the south you're outsourcing this decision to. And it was a good conversation to have because we've got to have some of those to start to turn things around and to have real conversations. Because for us, we're a school district that has zero extra money, voter-approved money. We're a school district that has none of the frills or anything and has no ability to raise money because our voters voted down every time. And so for us, limiting books is like one of the only resources these kids have that was an equalizer when you look to the people to the south, to the north that have thousands of more dollars per kid. than we do. And we just kept hammering it home, and then the community jumped on, and then before that, it was a momentum. And then the kid, like I said, the kids showed up. And once a kid starts showing up, you know you're on the right side of history. So.
Are there other communities in Minnesota going through this right now? Thinking to the ACLU? In the Minnesota, I mean, or is...
I mean, I know of 3.
I mean, I think we've heard of some other books being removed in other school districts. You know, I don't think it's happening as fast as it does in like Texas or Oklahoma or some of our neighbors to the west. But definitely it has happened, not to the level of St. Francis. St. Francis was an extreme example. School board members were quoting Bible verses at school board meetings and talking about Republican values. And oftentimes, school board members are a little bit more restrained in their discussions and the book removals. So, yes, not as bad. Doesn't mean it can't happen.
So I've got a question for all of you on the panel. Say I'm a recently retired person and I've come to a community meeting and the issue of book banning is being discussed, and a list of people who are running for a school board in the coming session has been put on the table, and I'm not particularly excited about any of the candidates whose name I see. If I'm beginning to entertain the idea that maybe I should run, could I come to Education Minnesota? Could I come to the ACLU and get a little bit of encouragement and guidance about how to prepare myself for a campaign? Because maybe, you know, if you don't see a good candidate out there that you want to lend your support to, that candidate might need to be you. So, you know, what's out there to help somebody step up?
So the question is, I want to get involved, how do I get started? Pretty much, right?
Yep.
So, yes, if you were going to be in the school board context, you probably wouldn't come to Education Minnesota, the state organization. You'd go to the local teachers and kind of just have a conversation, see what's really going on there, see if what you think is happening is really happening, because they'll tell you. Once you do that and you really want to take that step and you kind of figure out, I'm going to commit to knocking on 50 doors, you know, every 3 days, and I'm going to do that for 6 months, and I'm going to get to know my neighbors in a way I never have before. And you're going to buy yourself a good pair of shoes. That's my first thing I tell about everyone candidates, because you are going to wear them out. There are some groups. There's one work group that we work with sometimes called the School Board Integrity Project, which does training programs for people who are going to be first-time candidates for school boards. They ask you to sign a pledge opposing book bans and being sort of generally in favor of kind of racial equity in education. And if you kind of get over that pretty low hurdle, they have some training programs both online and in person on how to do sort of the very basics of how to be a candidate. You know, there's things you got to do. You got to set up a campaign finance things. You got to really have a little sense as to how to go to public meetings. You got to maybe have a little lawn sign and a little thing to put on your literature, and you better have a website. You know, all that kind of stuff that isn't hard, but it does help to have someone coach you through how to do it. So there are some resources available for it.
Good to know, because I think it's an important piece to help build civic engagement and keep it going. Anybody else out there in our audience? A question or a comment?
Me again. So we talked about schools. Are books being withdrawn from libraries around the state? Because of a concerted effort by people who don't agree with the books?
I can speak, at least in the local area. I got up to the date, up to the minute news. I spoke to my successor in my job as the protested committee chair just before this meeting. I was curious, really, because times have changed so much in the 2 years since I retired. And I am relieved to report to you that at least locally, there has not been an uptick in, for example, orchestrated protests where a whole group of people, right, purportedly individual protests, but really, you know, they're orchestrated. Since I retired, that's 2 years almost now, there have been 3 protests levied against the materials for the Ramsey County Library, the suburban public library system. 2 of them were pretty standard. People disliked, I guess, children's books, which is often, it's very, very common. One of them, however, was a self-published author whose book was not added to the collection of the Ramsey County Library. And she wanted to protest because she felt that this was censorship, that her self-published book had not been added. So I sort of count that as 2 for 3.
A Google search shows no other place but other than St. Francis. I looked it up.
Okay,
Well,
okay.
Certainly when
Yeah, I think when it comes to the community libraries, what I discovered during our time is that if you think school board meetings are low attended, you should attend the Anoka County Book Library team that gets together, because that'll put it to shame. Like, the idea that it hadn't been targeted yet, but I know our groups and the community members I talked to were worried. But the conversation when it comes around schools and book banning is often around the kids, is the moral high ground that is presented. And it just doesn't have the same impact, because you've got to make a deliberate choice to go to the community library. That's different versus I'm walking down a hall, and that's where it is believed that those that want to remove books have the moral high ground, and that's how they're protecting them, is because the kids can just walk in and do anything. But it's the parents' responsibility to have a conversation with the kids around the books that they have. It's a great conversation to have.
Actually, the argument for banning books in the public library is exactly the same. People will come in and say, I don't want my children seeing this book on the shelf. It's exactly the same argument. And the rebuttal always was, we want something for everybody, but that doesn't mean that everything has to be universally acceptable. And people really did grasp that argument. I'm glad, because I invented it.
So I'm wondering if there has been a change in the books that are added to the collections.
Shall I answer that? I will say after 2020, we made at least in our library system, we made a great effort to broaden the focus. We really we're taking, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion very seriously, and we did make efforts along those lines. In terms of, you know, I will be really frank with this group. When I started doing book bans or would-be book bans, all of the protests came from what I called the right, meaning people didn't like books that featured, I don't know, homosexual penguins, for example. Remember, you know, that famous children's book? As within the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, to my great surprise, I suddenly started getting protests from the left. And by that I mean, there are people in the community, for example, who feel that the Laura Ingalls Wilder books should no longer be in public libraries because, and they're quite right in this, because they are racist. They are, you know, it's a very poor picture that they offer of Native Americans. However, it is a very accurate to the era portrait. And my argument always was, how can we change history if we don't even know what history was? well, now I'm getting into my, I get really worked up about this. I was very serious about this subject. But I don't think that at least at this time, there is any pressure, any successful pressure, let's say, to drop things that are unpleasing to the groups, for instance, that were so exercised in St. Francis.
I think the biggest fallout that we dealt with after it was all said and done is now all of a sudden you're actually looking at checkout rates. And are kids actually checking out books like they used to? And which books are they checking out? And when you start to do that deep dive, you start to realize that, at least in St. Francis, I want to say the average age of the book that was in the library ended up being like 1995. Like, it was atrocious, where we needed to, now we were having, in my last few months there was conversations over how do we thoughtfully, when we replace the book, have the conversation on when they come in and out, and the ones to keep, and then the ones to modernize, or the ones, because we had just put them up there, and you'd find out that kids are not checking them out at the same rate as they used to. But that doesn't mean they're not reading books, and the idea that they're not taking in the content in a different way. And to what duty is the equalizing factor of a library in your school to providing students with opportunities that they otherwise might not have? And that book might not have been checked out for 5 years, but that doesn't mean it walks out the door, because there could be that student that comes through that otherwise would never have access to a book that talks about them and what they're struggling with and what they're feeling and what they need to cope with the situation that they're in right now. And that's where running just based off stats, figures, and that stuff cannot be the whole story. You must look at the book individually, review it with a passion and a purpose on how you decide to move it forward. And it's okay to take the book off the shelf and replace it with a modern copy that maybe has a little bit nicer binding and a little bit more approachable feel to it. And that's okay too. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about that, because schools now put less and less money into their libraries and continue to look at ways to downsize them. And there's just no way for a kid to get access to those resources besides the public school that they're able to show up to and start to search for the things that are important to them.
It's true. Any closing comments from any of you about what we've discussed tonight? In terms of words of encouragement, maybe, for the good folk who have gathered here.
Can I throw something? First of all, I want to say thank you for sticking around even after you learned there would be no pie. I was a little disappointed when I heard that myself. First of all, I just want to say thank you all for coming. Thanks for having us. And I just want to kind of note, isn't it great that we're talking about books for like an hour? Like physical books? Because we really didn't get into how important physical books and physical libraries could become the way things are trending. Yeah. Because as more media and more content goes digital and is controlled by people who we are now learning may not support all viewpoints in the same way, if you've been on X in the last 20 minutes or so. I think the role of school libraries of actual physical books and libraries like this one with actual physical books is going to become even more and more important, because nobody in Silicon Valley can just hit a button and make them go away. So once again, support your local library and support your schools, and please support your local school librarians who are having a bit of a tough go right now.
Judy, any word from you?
Oh, yeah, I got a word. As the only senior citizen, I believe, on this panel, I'll give David, I don't know, David, I don't know.
I'm getting there as fast as I can.
I noticed that many in the audience perhaps are in the same stage of life. The thing about being a senior citizen is you're retired and you have a lot of time. And that means that there is a lot of opportunity to get involved in your community in a way that perhaps someone with a full-time job and 3 kids, I'm looking at you down here, cannot. So now you have the time when situations like what happened in St. Francis come up, or even not. You know, the library has a Friends support organization. There is no reason that you can all of you join, and we would love to have you, so thank you.
That's the truth. Alicia?
I want to echo both of you and just say how wonderful it is to talk about books and think about all of the wonderful ways that they shape us and they show us different places and how we should treasure that. And it, you know, reading everything I could get my hands on when I was a kid is how I became the effective advocate. I like to think I'm an effective advocate. I am today. And like I said earlier, my job is necessary to keep all of our rights protected, but it is not enough. It's not sufficient. And the people in this room, you and your families and your friends can all really make a difference. Like, it's you that makes my job easy. And seeing how much everybody is dedicated to libraries, even when there's no pie, makes it so much easier for me to go to my job every day, which is hard right now. And then I get to come here and see you folks, and so thank you. That gives me hope. I hope it gives all of you hope. It's dark, but there is always light. So thank you for having me.
All right.
Gonna bring us home, right?
No pressure. I think you've heard a lot of thank yous, and it's because not out of a whole community, not a lot of people come marching into a book conversation to try to see or even hear and hear the stories that may or may not be happening for you locally. I just really appreciate the opportunity to share our story so that maybe you can share it with somebody so that when that moment of something or something like it, be it book bans or the wrong poster that somebody thinks should or should not be in a classroom pops up, that you'll get the chance to lean into some of those conversations. And don't be afraid, even, I think I've done the math, I might be the youngest in the room. We don't like to talk on the phone, but to share the story or to actually share a real story normally needs to happen face-to-face or through conversation. Far too often we depend on each other through an email to show up somewhere or a text message or the best conversations, and I'll say it even as a young one, is when someone sits down, shares their story, what they've heard, and tries to bring forward a change that is possible. And it's not done on a forward or on a random phone call or a large amount of text. It's done by doing the deliberate work of saying, hey, do you want to sit down and have pie?
I love this pie theme.
Where is the pie?
It's March 13th, March 14th.
Oh, they
Pie Day. Pie Day.
They didn't know where the hell the pie is
Get her
and
done
when.
with the pie.
All right, thanks so much for coming, everybody, and thanks to this panel.